At the Potsdam Conference, from July the 17th to August the 2nd, 1945, Stalin, Churchill and Truman agreed to divide Austria and Germany, with Berlin and Vienna, the capital cities, both inside the Soviet zones, but occupied by the four powers.
2/3 of the German army faced the Soviet Union. Most of the Second World War was fought inside the Soviet Union. As a consequence of that, it was felt that the Soviets deserved the most in the reparations at the end of the Second World War. In any case, they were very good friends at this time. In September 1945, Stalin invited Truman to inspect the troops because he wanted to impress him with the amount of troops they've got. So he took him to Moscow, and Truman stood on the steps of the Kremlin, of the Lenin Mausoleum, and he watched as the troops came past. First the band came past, then the tanks came past, then the cavalry came past, and who was on his white horse, anybody know? Zhukov, the head of the man who defended Stalingrad and the man who took Berlin. And then 2.5 million soldiers marched past. It took them 10.5 hours to march past. And then he shook Truman like that. He says, "What do you think?" And Truman said, "Oh my God, that's so impressive." Right? And then at the airport, he turned around and he said to Stalin, he says, "Why don't you come, Uncle Joe, to Washington and see our armies, see our forces?" And so Stalin agreed. 1 week later, he went to Washington and he stood on the steps of the White House on Pennsylvania Avenue. First the band came past, then the majorettes came past with their batons, and then there were two guys came past, each carrying a briefcase. Like this. And then Stalin looked down the road, nobody there. Looked down the other side, nobody there. And he turned around and said, "Where are your forces? Where are your armies?" And Truman says, "That's them. He's got the nuclear bomb and he's got the capitulation papers." That was the new balance of power at the end of the Second World War. The United States dropped 2 nuclear bombs on the 6th of August 1945 and the 9th of August 1945, killing 200,000 people almost immediately, and another 100,000 died within 3 months of the end of the Second World War as a result of radiation sickness. So that new balance of power was established by dropping the nuclear bombs on Japan and threatening the Soviet Union there with the so far and no further.
The victors intended to dismantle heavy industry and leave a denazified, weakened Germany based on agriculture and light industry. During the conference, news of the successful testing of the atomic bomb reached Truman. He informed Churchill, but when Stalin was told, he appeared unmoved by the news. Stalin's plan was to create regimes in the image of Moscow in Eastern Europe. But Germany was not originally part of this plan. He wanted Germany to be neutral, unable to threaten the Soviet Union, but nevertheless bound to it. German prisoners of war were taken to the USSR and used as a labor force to repair the destruction carried out under the Nazi occupation.
Die Gefangenschaft war vor allem für die sowjetische Seite, die ja 20 Millionen Menschen verloren hatte, auch eine Situation, wo die Deutschen, wie man es dann berechtigt nannte, eine Wiedergutmachung zu leisten haben. Und zu denen, die in dieser Weise Wiedergutgemacht haben, besonders deshalb meine Betonung zu Moskau, in den Gebieten, wo die Fronten zwischen der faschistischen Armee und der Roten Armee Jahr 41 häufig wechselten, wo verbrannte Erde noch zu erleben war, als ich dort 1946 meine Arbeit begann, dass das vor allem das Ziel und die Aufgabe war, die Schäden des Krieges und das Wiederingangbringen der Wirtschaft auch mit deutschen Kriegsgefangenen zu bewerkstelligen.
Well, there were genuine workers' revolutions, don't forget, from 1943 onwards. In Italy, in Greece, in France, there was a revolutionary situation, and even in little Denmark, there was a general strike in 1944 under the Nazi occupations. A workers' movement would have presented a big threat, and there were elements of that in Czechoslovakia, in Poland, in the East. There were elements of workers' councils. Workers seized the factories. That was soon put a stop to by the Stalinists. They didn't want that. But a Stalinist regime was a different kettle of fish. Stalinist regime under the control of Moscow, that presented no threat. The bourgeois was eliminated from these so-called Popular Front governments, and the Stalinists took over. Incidentally, they took over with the support of the population. The idea that they somehow foisted themselves on the population is entirely false. For example, in Czechoslovakia, they were so confident, they actually armed the workers. They had workers' militia, they had guns, they called them out onto the streets to demonstrate. Of course, the following day they collected all the guns in again.
Truman believed the assimilation of Western Europe into the United States sphere of influence depended on German economic and industrial recovery, with the intention that the Western industrial portions of post-war Germany would be bound to US policy. In 1947, the idea of the Marshall Plan created a crisis in Soviet foreign policy, which was predicated on a weakened Germany and continued reparations payments. The US president refused to give the Soviet Union reparations from industrial plants in Western zones. In 1948, the Western sectors introduced a new currency, the Deutschmark, and brought this to West Berlin. Stalin charged the West with breaking the agreements to treat Germany as a single economic entity. A new currency was likewise introduced into the Soviet zone. On the 24th of June 1948, the Soviets blockaded the land routes from the Western zones to West Berlin. The United States supplied West Berlin by air, which galvanized public support behind them through its gargantuan logistical effort. Stalin attacked the West Plan to split Germany, but Stalin's appeal to the German nationalist sentiment appeared hollow. Had he not insisted on expelling the 12 million Germans to carve out the new Poland? In May 1949, the Federal Republic was created, and Stalin lifted the blockade.